A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
Hey everyone, welcome back to My Weird Prompts. I am Herman, and I am joined as always by my brother Korn. We are coming to you today from our home in Jerusalem, and I have to say, Korn, the atmosphere here is unlike anything I have experienced in the years we have lived here.
Herman Poppleberry, reporting for duty. You are right, the air is thick. It is a busy, heavy time to be living in this city. Ever since the operations on February 28th, it feels like the entire world has its eyes fixed firmly on Tehran. Everyone is trying to parse the tea leaves of the post-Khamenei era, wondering who is going to emerge from the power vacuum and what the new Iranian state is going to look like.
It is the natural instinct, right? When a pillar of regional stability, or instability, depending on your view, collapses, you stare at the rubble. But while the West is hyper-focused on the immediate political fallout in Iran, our housemate Daniel sent us a prompt that suggests we are looking at the wrong side of the border. Or at least, we are missing the massive ripple effects moving north and east.
Daniel has that uncanny knack for finding the signal in the noise. He sent over some incredibly detailed notes about the Central Asian landmass, those 5 republics that most people in the West just group together as the stands. His core argument is that while the headlines are obsessed with the military and political drama in Iran, there is a structural tectonic shift happening in the Central Asian steppes that is going to define the next decade.
We are talking about a region that has historically been the hollow center of the world map for many Westerners. It is that vast space you fly over on your way from London to Tokyo. But right now, it is experiencing its most significant geopolitical realignment since the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. And unlike the slow decay of the 90s, this is happening at breakneck speed. If you were standing in a grocery store in Almaty, Kazakhstan, or Dushanbe, Tajikistan, this morning, March 12, 2026, you would not be debating the grand strategy of the Iran strike. You would be staring at the price of flour and cooking oil.
That is the ground reality that people miss. The February 28th operation against the Iranian regime and the subsequent chaos there has triggered an immediate, visceral food security crisis across Central Asia. We often forget that Iran is not just a regional military power. It is a critical transit hub and a massive food exporter for its northern neighbors. When the Iranian borders tightened and the export bans kicked in following the death of the supreme leader, the supply chains for the stands basically snapped overnight.
It is the classic second-order effect. You pull a thread in Tehran, and the sweater starts unraveling in Bishkek. But today, we want to go much deeper than just the current inflation spike. We want to talk about why Central Asia is becoming the ultimate pivot point for 2026. We are seeing China effectively eclipse Russia as the regional hegemon, the European Union trying to buy its way into the neighborhood with a €12 billion commitment and a massive demographic pressure cooker that is about to boil over.
It is the new great game, Herman, but the players and the stakes have changed. In the 19th century, it was about British and Russian officers playing spy games over mountain passes. Today, it is about rare earth minerals, high-speed rail corridors, and who controls the water in a world that is getting significantly warmer and drier. And we have to start by busting the biggest myth of all, which is the idea that these 5 countries, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, are some kind of monolithic post-Soviet bloc.
Right, the stand's misconception. It is the quickest way to get the region wrong. If you treat Kyrgyzstan the same way you treat Turkmenistan, your foreign policy is going to fail.
Oh, absolutely. They could not be more different. You have Kyrgyzstan, which has this history of being a messy, fragile, but very real democracy. It has a vibrant civil society and a tradition of street protests that actually change governments. It is almost unique in the region for that level of political volatility. Then you go to the opposite extreme with Turkmenistan, which is essentially a gas-rich personality cult. It is one of the most closed societies on Earth, almost like a desert version of North Korea. They have spent billions on white marble cities, while the rest of the country remains largely isolated.
And then you have the heavyweights. Kazakhstan is the economic engine of the region. It is the size of Western Europe and is trying to perform this incredibly delicate balancing act, maintaining its huge Russian-speaking population while fostering a new, assertive Kazakh national identity. And then there is Uzbekistan, which for a long time was the hermit kingdom under Karimov. But since 2016, and especially in the last few years under Mirziyoyev, it has been trying to brand itself as the great regional reformer, a hub for manufacturing, and a bridge between all the other stands.
And we cannot forget Tajikistan. They are the outlier ethnically. While the rest of the region is overwhelmingly Turkic, the Tajiks are Persian-speaking. This is why the Iran crisis hits them so hard on a level that goes beyond economics. It is cultural and linguistic. But across all of them, the big story of 2025 and early 2026 has been this incredible economic performance. The region as a whole saw gross domestic product growth exceed 6% last year. That is the strongest performance in a decade, which is wild when you consider the global instability.
It is a double-edged sword, though. That growth is being driven by high energy prices and the diversion of trade routes away from Russia, but it is being managed by these aging elites who are increasingly out of touch with a very young population. That brings us to the most important shift we have seen in the last 12 months, the fundamental breaking of the relationship with Russia.
You're talking about the migrant worker raids. This is the part of the story that does not get enough play in the West. For decades, the social contract in places like Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan was simple. You send your young men to Russia to work on construction sites or drive taxis. They send home remittances that make up 30 or even 40% of your national economy. In exchange, your government stays in Russia's political and military orbit.
But that contract is dead. Throughout 2025 and into this year, we have seen these brutal, nationalist-driven raids on Central Asian workers in Russian cities. It started as a reaction to security fears, but it turned into something much uglier. We are talking about thousands of people being rounded up, stripped of their documents, and in some cases, forcibly conscripted to work in logistics for the Russian military.
It is a divorce, Herman. A messy, public, and very bitter divorce. The trust is gone. Dushanbe and Tashkent are looking at Moscow and realizing that their people are no longer welcome there and their economies are too vulnerable. And who is standing there with a bouquet of flowers and a very large checkbook? China.
This is where the great power pivot becomes a reality. China's approach is fundamentally different from the old Russian security umbrella. The Russians always wanted to be the neighborhood policeman. They wanted the boots on the ground and the bases. China is not interested in that, at least not yet. They are interested in the plumbing.
That is the perfect metaphor. They are building the plumbing of the 21st century. The most obvious manifestation of this is the China-Kyrgyzstan-Uzbekistan Railway. People have been talking about this project for over 25 years, and it always stalled because Russia did not want a rail line that bypassed its territory. They wanted everything to go through the Trans-Siberian. But in the last year, with Russia distracted by its own internal issues and the war, Beijing just pushed the button.
And the technical side of that railway is mind-blowing. You are dealing with some of the most difficult mountain terrain on the planet. We are talking about tunnels at 4,000 meters of elevation. It is a massive engineering feat that basically says the center of gravity has moved. If you want to get goods from Shanghai to Istanbul or the European markets, you do not need to go through Siberia anymore. You go through the heart of the steppes. It cuts weeks off the transit time.
And it is not just China. The European Union has finally woken up. They realize they cannot rely on Russian energy or Russian transit routes ever again. This is why we saw that €12 billion commitment via the Global Gateway Initiative. They are calling it a strategic partnership, but what it really is an attempt to build the Trans-Caspian Transport Corridor, or the Middle Corridor.
We should probably explain why that matters. The Middle Corridor starts in China, crosses Central Asia by rail, hits the port of Aktau in Kazakhstan, goes across the Caspian Sea to Baku in Azerbaijan, and then through Georgia to the Black Sea. It is a complex multimodal route, but it is the only way to connect east and west without going through Russia or Iran.
And that is where our previous episodes connect. We talked about the Caspian Shield in episode 1133, specifically how Israel and Azerbaijan are tightening their security ties. Well, that security is what allows the Europeans to feel comfortable dumping billions into this transit route. They are trying to turn Central Asia from a landlocked dead end into a global transit hub. But the question remains, can the European Union actually compete with China here? 12 billion euros is a lot of money, but China has been pouring hundreds of billions into the Belt and Road for over a decade.
It is a different kind of play, corn. China is about the hard infrastructure, the rails, the ports, the mines. The European Union is trying to focus on the soft infrastructure, the customs standards, the digital trade platforms, the green energy transition. For example, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan are currently going through what people are calling a nuclear renaissance. They are looking at small modular reactors to solve their chronic power shortages. The Europeans and the Americans are trying to win those contracts to prevent a total Chinese monopoly on the region's energy grid.
It is a high-stakes game, and while all this is happening on the grand strategy level, the internal pressures are mounting. You mentioned the youth bulge earlier, and we have to talk about that because it is the ticking time bomb in the region. In some of these countries, over 35% of the population is under the age of 15. These kids do not remember the Soviet Union. They do not have the same reflexive deference to Moscow that their parents or grandparents had. They are connected to the global internet. They see what is happening in the rest of the world, and they are frustrated by the lack of opportunity at home.
And that frustration is being compounded by the water crisis. In Central Asia, water is not just a resource, it is a weapon and an existential threat. You have the upstream countries, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, which have the mountains and the glaciers. They want to use the water for hydroelectric power in the winter to keep their people warm. Then you have the downstream countries, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Kazakhstan, which need that same water for irrigation in the summer to grow the cotton and wheat that their economies depend on.
It is a classic zero-sum game, and as the glaciers in the Pamir and Tian Shan mountains retreat due to climate shifts, the total amount of water is shrinking. We have already seen border skirmishes in the Fergana Valley over irrigation canals. It is one of the most volatile places on Earth because the borders there look like a jigsaw puzzle gone wrong.
That is why the Kujand agreements for March 25, 2025 were so significant. For the first time, we saw the regional leaders sit down without a Russian or Chinese mediator and actually hammer out some border demarcations and water-sharing protocols. It was a moment of regional maturity, an attempt to say, we have to solve this ourselves or we are all going to collapse.
But the pressure is still there. The Fergana Valley is so densely populated, and the borders were designed by Soviet planners, specifically to make sure no one could ever leave the Union without a fight. You have these enclaves where a village might be part of Tajikistan, but it is entirely surrounded by Kyrgyzstan. It is a map designed for conflict.
And that brings us to the identity crisis. These states are only 35 years old in their modern form. They are trying to build a modern national identity on top of these artificial Soviet borders, but underneath those borders are ancient tribal and nomadic cultures, and beneath that is the legacy of the great Islamic Silk Road civilizations.
You are talking about Samarkand and Bukhara. I mean, think about the history there, Herman. In the Middle Ages, these were the cultural and intellectual capitals of the world. This is where modern algebra was pioneered by Al-Khwarizmi. This is where some of the greatest astronomical observations were made. There is a real movement now, especially in Uzbekistan, to reclaim that legacy. They want to move past the Soviet era, and even past the nomadic era, to frame themselves as the rightful heirs to a sophisticated, urban, scientific civilization.
It is a powerful narrative for a young population. It says, you are not just a former Soviet subject or a migrant worker in Moscow, you are the descendant of the people who taught the world how to do math. But that identity construction is happening at the same time as this rising religious conservatism. How do the governments balance that?
It is a tightrope walk. Most of these regimes are deeply secular, a hangover from the Soviet days. They are terrified of political Islam. But they are also trying to use religion as a way to distance themselves from Russia and connect with the broader Muslim world, including the Gulf states, who are also investing heavily in the region. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are pouring money into infrastructure and energy projects in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan.
So you have this bizarre mix of high-tech Chinese railways, European green energy initiatives, Gulf state investment, medieval Islamic identity, and Soviet-era authoritarianism all colliding in this one landmass. It is a lot to take in. And then you throw in the Iran factor. If the situation in Tehran continues to deteriorate, or if we see a more permanent disruption of the Persian Gulf trade routes, Central Asia becomes even more critical as an overland alternative.
I want to dig into that Iran ripple effect a bit more, because I think people underestimate how much Central Asia relies on Iran for its connection to the sea. If you are in Turkmenistan, the port of Bandar Abbas in Iran is your main gateway to the global market. If that gateway is closed or compromised because of the current conflict, you are effectively a prisoner of your geography again.
And that is why the food export ban was such a shock. Iran is a major producer of fruits, vegetables, and processed foods that the stands depend on. When the Iranian government froze those exports on February 28th to secure their own internal supply during the crisis, it sent a shockwave through the markets in Central Asia. We are seeing countries like Kazakhstan frantically trying to source grain and produce from elsewhere, but the logistics are a nightmare.
It really highlights the fragility of these states. They're growing at 6%. They're building these massive railways, but they can still be brought to their knees by a price spike in bread, which is why the leadership is so nervous. They know that in this part of the world, revolutions do not start with demands for democracy. They start with the price of fuel or the price of flour. We saw that in Kazakhstan in early 2022, and the leaders have not forgotten it.
So corned. What should our listeners be watching for? If we are trying to track whether Central Asia successfully pivots into this new role or whether it slides into chaos, what are the indicators?
For me, the number one thing to watch is the transit volume on the Trans-Caspian corridor. If we see a significant, sustained shift of freight from the northern Russian route to this middle route, it means the decoupling from Moscow is permanent. There are specific metrics we can look at, like the container throughput at the port of Aktau in Kazakhstan. If that hits a certain threshold by the end of 2026, the geopolitical map of Eurasia has officially been redrawn.
And what about the water? Are there specific flashpoints we should be keeping an eye on?
Watch the Fergana Valley during the irrigation season, which usually peaks in July and August. If we see a breakdown in the water-sharing agreements we saw in Kujand, or if Tajikistan starts filling the reservoir for the Rogan Dam without coordinating with its neighbors, that is a massive red flag. That is how you get a regional conflict that no one is prepared for.
It is a fascinating, high-stakes situation. It feels like Central Asia is finally stepping out of the shadow of its neighbors and becoming a player in its own right, but the path forward is incredibly narrow. They are trying to be a bridge between East and West, while their traditional security partner Russia is falling apart, and their southern neighbor Iran is in the middle of a regime-altering crisis.
It is a lot of pressure for a group of relatively young states, but that is what makes it so important for us to talk about. We cannot just look at the world through the lens of the immediate conflict. We have to look at the structural shifts the conflict is accelerating. The shift from a Russian backyard to a global transit hub is one of the biggest stories of our time.
Well said. And I think that is a good place to start wrapping this up. We have covered a lot of ground today, from bread prices in Almaty to the tunnels of the Tian Shan Mountains. It is a reminder that the world is much bigger and more interconnected than the headlines usually suggest.
It really is. And before we go, I want to give a quick shout out to our listeners. If you are enjoying these deep dives into the weird and often overlooked corners of global politics, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. It really does help other people find the show.
And if you want to dig deeper into some of the things we mentioned today, like the security dynamics in the Caspian or the broader context of the 2026 global conflicts, you can check out our archive at myweirdprompts.com. Episode 645 is a good one for the broader war context and 1133 for the Israel-Azerbaijan connection.
And do not forget the Telegram channel. Just search for My Weird Prompts. We post every time a new episode drops, and it is a great way to stay updated in real time.
Well, this has been another episode of My Weird Prompts. Thanks for sticking with us through the steppes of Central Asia.
It has been a blast. We will be back soon with more.
Until then, keep asking the weird questions.
And keep looking at the plumbing.
Take care, everyone.
See you next time.
I think we really hit the core of it today, Corn. That transition from Russia to China is just so fundamental. It is the story of the decade. We are watching the end of an era that started in the 19th century.
It is wild to think about. All right, let's get some coffee. I think Daniel is actually back with some more notes.
Oh boy, here we go again. Thanks for listening, everyone. This has been My Weird Prompts.
Goodbye.
One more thing. I wanted to mention that the whole concept of the Great Game has always been about outside powers. But what struck me today is how much these countries are starting to exert their own agency. They are not just pawns anymore. When Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan started coordinating their foreign policy without asking for permission from Moscow or Beijing, that was the real turning point.
That is the big shift. It is a fragile kind of independence, but it is real. We will see if it holds through the summer. The water issues and the food inflation are going to be the real test of their stability.
Definitely something to keep an eye on. All right, now we are really done.
For real this time.
Thanks again for listening to My Weird Prompts. We will catch you in the next one.
Take care.
Actually, Corn, I just thought of one more thing about the nuclear renaissance in Kazakhstan. Did you see the report on the uranium processing?
Oh, the one about the shift toward domestic enrichment. That is a huge deal for their energy sovereignty. If you have the world's largest uranium deposits, why would you let someone else do all the profitable parts of the process?
It is all part of that same theme of reclaiming their own destiny. All right, now we really have to go before we start a whole new episode on nuclear physics.
Fair point. Goodbye for real, everyone.
Bye! And thanks again to Daniel for the prompt. It really opened up a fascinating rabbit hole.
He always does. We will have to see what he comes up with for next week.
I am sure it will be something equally unexpected.
Can't wait. See you all then.
This has been My Weird Prompts, a production of the Poppleberry Brothers in Jerusalem. Check out the website for more.
And we will see you in the next one.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts, that's the flows from slow